take a look at character design for ants. Of course, the first question we asked ourselves is, what do ants look like in our movie? Pretty quickly we said we do want them to be six-limbed, but this first drawing you can see actually has 4 arms instead of 4 legs, which is what we eventually settled on. The next drawing shows another version of the 4-armed character, but do they wear clothes? And here we are exploring whether the ants actually wear anything.
Another illustration by the same artist with even more elaborate clothing, and again a very, very angular sort of stark presentation on a character.
We looked at countless electron microscope pictures of real insects and tried to incorporate some of that, but you quickly learn that real insects are terrifying. This next image, this lineup of workers and soldiers, Z and Bala, this really shows how strongly we let ourselves be influenced at one point by the real world of insects, and how quickly we realized that if you wanted to be passionate about these characters, we couldn't stick to the real world. It was just too horrifying.
Yeah,
down under in that size.
Very fascinating designs, perhaps hard to connect with ultimately.
Next drawing shows perhaps the other extreme.
Yeah, this is almost like Jiminy Cricket in a way. Very soft, rounded shapes, a much simpler design.
Not six-limbed, but very human, and of course, obviously we thought maybe that was too extreme in another direction, so we pulled a little bit away from that as well.
Next one is a very ant-like approach.
And then the following one shows with these guys wearing gloves and with these very funny ideas with the antenna and light bulbs. I mean, we really started playing with appeal, and frankly, this was some of the first things that for Z and the look of the generic ants we started to get pretty excited about.
It really is all about that ability to look at these characters' faces and understand there's something interesting, perhaps complex, going on in their head.
Want to see them thinking. Of course, we weren't afraid of going a little crazy. Here he is, Z, in all of his glory. Just imagine what our film could have been.
Yes.
It came down to really kind of a battle of shape, and so a lot of the next Z designs we're going to look at are just extremes of shape, from triangular faces and big bottomed characters to creatures that are heart-shaped in head and limb. But this little guy with a striped gaster, of course, ants don't have bottoms, they have gasters. There's our entomology lesson for the day. This little guy is starting to, I think you see how related he is to where we ended up in the film. 4 hands was so busy and necessitated so much animation that we thought it would actually get in the way of the acting.
We found that by having the character have 4 legs but walk so that the legs on one side of the body moved together, really kept us away from that 4-legged animal, horse-like walk.
This lovely little beseeching-looking character tugging on his fingers here, we're starting to see what makes great character design successful. It's half about the design, but the other half is just appeal. Does the character look like they're thinking? Does it look like somebody who's got a story to tell? I don't know who did we think this guy was going to be.
We really asked our character designers, and especially Raman Hoy, who kind of headed up that effort, to do hundreds, if not thousands, of drawings exploring what ants could look like. And we got some really wonderful designs. This is one of my favorite designs that, we all knew we'd never use in the film, but...
The gecko-headed guy, I don't know.
I've got it up on my wall, in fact.
And there we have him. What? There's Z with, looks like he just had a really bad marine haircut and he's been sleepless for 4 days. Could have been a very different movie. We certainly took a look at all these different directions.
Another simple Z.
Simple Z, 2 arms, 2 legs. Now we're starting to see some of the directions we settled on. How complicated to make the bodies, how complicated to make the faces, how insect-like to make the details. And this lovely close-up of this rather sleepy-looking gentleman was the first time we started to get excited about finding Z. And we played with lots of subtle variations on that face, turned it into one of the first characters created on the computer, who then became one of our generic characters when we moved on to the final Z design, which we see here. Trying to find some age and maturity, some lines in the face.
We did find that when we took this particular head into the sculpture that we had to reduce a lot of the lines because, of course, once they're actually there in 3 dimensions, they show up all the more. But this was definitely the final drawing which allowed us to head into sculpture.
And then we start exploring it. What happens under extreme conditions like this gale force wind? or as he goes through moments of the film of solitude and loneliness or confusion. And so we actually churned out, particularly the amazing Raman Hoy, churned out, I think, quite literally hundreds, if not thousands of drawings. Even after we had done all the work of settling on a design, it was time to explore that design to its fullest. Bala had the same kind of challenges, coming up with a female character, a character that has some grace and some different kind of beauty than the male characters, particularly hard with insects, not the most graceful looking creatures.
Here's Bala with the flip, which actually was modified for the final version of her, but we thought we could find a way, you know, even though she has this hard exoskeleton, to
hint at hair.
Hint at hair and therefore hint at a little femininity.
But after that we started to get, here's a nice appealing shot of Bala relaxing, and still a long way before the final design, but I think you can see how we're starting to narrow in on something. This looks like space age Bala.
We explored just about every color in the rainbow for the ants, and ultimately settled on something that was perhaps closer to human skin tone. It just sort of implied a certain warmth, and we found that if our characters were too dark or too cool, they just weren't as immediately accessible as when they were in the warmer range.
Here, as Bala rests on this podium, we start to see really close to her final character design. This really starts to show not only the look and feel of the character, but a little bit of the attitude. You can see some of both her charm and a little haughtiness in that. It's a perfect way to explore the character. And then to go from black and white to color and explore that sense of the royal colors, golds and purples, things that you associate with royalty as they apply to the world of insects. We tried to stay true to the world of insects. You know, it's a pretty colorful world down there if you look at enough photography of the insect world, and we didn't want to stray from that, but we wanted to take advantage of the extremes.
Here was an attempt not so much to work with Bala's design, but just to take the idea of Bala's design and see what kind of accoutrements you would have.
Speaking of clothing, what we call the gaster cover, the leaf at the waist holding onto a leaf over the back end of the character, we did use that for her too, and in fact had to change it from scene to scene as it became more ragged in her journey with Z. We're going to move on to some explorations of early mandible designs.
This is a really early stab, lots of fun angles and sharp corners and what have you, and a very sinister expression.
You can see some of the snivelingness in this first exploration.
And some of that thinness there was certainly inspiring ultimately for Cutter, his final design. Then in this next illustration you can see some exploration into how we might clothe the soldiers. We decided, of course, not to go this far.
Yeah, it was tempting to dip into much more science fiction inspired stuff, but it really wasn't true to the organic world of the ants, so we returned to things that were really made out of the materials in their world.
This next illustration was probably one of the very first illustrations that was done as we explored the characters, and very human proportions, and the belt and the cape, all very human, and we decided very early on to steer away from some of those ideas.
But think of the fortune we could have made in Halloween costumes. Looks like you can climb right in. The next drawing is very clearly inspired by actual electron microscopy, yes. But this is just a frightening character. It's way too alien, and anybody who has the horrifying experience of looking at that kind of photograph of the real insect world will be calling the Orkin Man immediately.
It's another wonderful illustration for a possible direction for Mandible.
And when he was still, even then he was still Formica.
Mandible's original name was Formica, which is some Latin name for a species of ant, I believe. And it sounded too much like a kitchen countertop.
Yeah, so we thought it was General Countertop. But then we started to play with the idea of this, General Patton was a big inspiration for where we wanted to take Mandible, and we start seeing some barrel-chested Patton characters here. And
you can see the little bumps on the sides of his gaster there. Now we move to a couple designs for the wasps, and this was a lot of fun. On these secondary characters, we could really push things to extremes that we weren't able to go to with our main characters.
Shannon
Blast.
Jeffries did some terrific work on the wasps, and boy, we really, from the get-go, loved these wasps. There's an attitude that comes out of the male and female here, Chip and Muffy. You don't even need to hear their voices. You can see these pictures, completely imagine the voices, and that was exactly what happened when we showed these drawings to Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin. They just needed to look at this, and they said, "Oh, I can do that. I know. Let me give you this voice." And sure enough, they were the wasps right from the start.